Welcome to the conversation with the 2020 and 2021 New Generation Photography Award winners. Bonjour et bienvenue à cette conversation avec les gagnants du prix Nouvelle Génération de photographes pour 2020 et 2021. My name is Jessica Arsenault. I'm an educator in the Department of Visitor Experience and Public Programs here at the National Gallery of Canada. Mon nom est Jessica Arsenault. Je suis éducatrice dans le département d'expérience du visiteur et programme public au Musée des Beaux-Arts du Canada. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that the National Gallery of Canada resides on the unceded land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, who have been the guardians of this land since time immemorial in the present and for the future. We are particularly grateful today to come together in this land that has been a place of gathering since time immemorial, and today allows us to gather after much time apart. Avant de commencer, je souhaite reconnaître que le Musée des Beaux-Arts du Canada se situe sur le territoire ancestral et non cédé de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe, qui sont les gardiens de ce territoire depuis les temps immémoriaux, pour le présent et le futur. Nous sommes particulièrement reconnaissants aujourd'hui de pouvoir nous rassembler sur ce territoire qui a toujours été un espace de rassemblement et l'est encore aujourd'hui. I want to thank the simultaneous interpretation team for their work this morning. Before we dive into the conversation, I want to share how to use the simultaneous interpretation units. At the top of the device, you will find an on-off button. The large circular dial allows you to bring the volume up or decrease the volume, and the button at the center is to change the channel. The unit is already set to channel 2 to listen in French. If you would like to listen through the unit in English, go to channel 1. For those listening online, you can listen in English on the Anglophone Facebook page of the gallery or in French on the Francophone Facebook page. Avant de commencer la conversation, voici comment accéder à la traduction simultanée. Sur le dessus, il y a un bouton pour mettre en marche et éteindre. Le grand cadran règle le volume et le bouton au centre du cadran est pour choisir le canal. Le canal 2 est présélectionné pour entendre la traduction simultanée en français. Si vous souhaitez entendre dans vos écouteurs le son de la scène en anglais, sélectionnez le canal 1. Pour ceux qui nous écoutent en ligne, vous pouvez aller sur la page Facebook francophone du musée afin d'écouter en français et sur la page anglophone afin d'écouter en anglais. Today's discussion will last approximately 1 hour and will be followed by time for questions and answers with the audience online and in person. Today's event will take place in English, but questions are welcome in both English and French. For people joining on the Facebook Live, you're invited to share your questions in the comment section, and I will do my best to share them during the Q&A portion. For your safety, we have a few additional COVID protocols in place today. To ensure a good flow in and out of the space, the door on your left will be used to enter the auditorium and the door on your right to exit it. We ask that you keep your mask on and 2 meters apart at all times. Thank you for your cooperation and understanding. I'm delighted to welcome the facilitator of today's conversation, my colleague Andrea Kunard. Andrea Kunard, Senior Curator of Photographs, curates exhibitions on historical and contemporary Canadian photography, including Shifting Sights in 2000, Susan McEachern, Structures of Meaning 2004, Stealing the Gaze 2008, Scott McFarland, A Cultivated View in 2009, Fred Herzog 2011, Clash, Conflicts and Its Consequences 2012, Michel Campeau, Icons of Obsolescence 2013, Photography in Canada 1960 to 2000 in 2017, Marlene Crate's Places, Paths and Pauses in 2017, Anthropocene in 2018, and Moira Davy the Faithful in 2020. Virtual exhibits include Photo Stories Canada, which focuses on the National Film Board of Canada Still Photography Division collection. Kunard has taught photo history, Canadian art, and cultural theory at Carleton and Queen's University, and lectured on photography throughout Canada. Co-editor of the Cultural Work of Photography in Canada, she has also written articles on contemporary and historical photography in the Journal of Canadian Art History, the International Journal of Canadian Studies, and Early Popular Visual Culture. Andrea will now introduce the winners of the 2020 and 2021 New Generation Photography Award. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was a marvelous introduction, and welcome everyone to this Meet the Artist event. and where you'll have the opportunity to listen to and to meet the 2020 and 2021 New Generation Photography Award winners, Catherine Takpani, Curtis Randolph, Chris Donovan, Denise Nugent Polashi, and Dustin Bronze. For this afternoon's event, each of the artists is going to speak to about their work for about 5 minutes, and then more generally to one another, just to give everyone a larger context for what they can see upstairs, which is an absolutely marvelous exhibition of their work. They've done a fantastic job, all of them. It's been a pleasure working with you all. Thank you so much. And then after that, we'll take some questions from the floor and online. Very special thanks to all of the staff at the National Gallery who've worked so hard for this event and for coordinating it. Thanks also to Scotiabank for their support of photography here at the gallery and establishing the prize that celebrates the work of a young generation of artists just beginning their career. And finally, thank you, our public, for joining us here today and your support of the gallery. We couldn't do this without you. Thank you so much. We have 5 of the 6 artists who won the award over the 2 years, and unfortunately Noah Friebel can't be with us. He's in Germany right at the moment, continuing his education, but we wish him well. His work is fantastic, so please go up and see it. So let's begin our program with Catherine Takpani. Catherine is an Ottawa-based Inuk artist whose photographs set performative and political gestures against both natural and built environments. Please welcome Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you. Unusakut, Catherine Nuyunga, Ottawa Mutauyunga. My name is Catherine Takpani, and I reside in Ottawa. I would love to first and foremost thank everyone at the gallery and at Scotiabank and all the other winners today. This is an amazing experience. My first piece of work that I would like to speak about is called Our Women and Girls Are Sacred. It speaks to the devastating and disproportionate rate of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit. I wanted to honor those who have gone missing and murdered, and I wanted to speak to my own grief with Annie Putuguk, which I specifically took this image for. And I wanted the red smoke to resemble their spirits and to honor them and to cherish. My next piece is called Emotic, and it's a traditional Inuit woman's garment. Underneath the hood, there's a pouch for the baby, and I took this image when I was pregnant with my first child, my son, and I wanted to connect the land, my culture, and motherhood all together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. That's fantastic. That's great. It's very beautiful. Our next artist is Curtis Randolph. Having grown up in a theater family, Curtis constructs scenes as either tableau or staged documentary narratives to question ideas of fact and fiction in the photographic medium. Please welcome Curtis.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Andrea, for the good introduction, and thank you, Scotiabank, for this opportunity. For the series that's on view upstairs, I chose to present the series My Father's Son, which began in 2017 and followed through until 2019. And the first image that I have on view behind me is the image of Retiree Soiree. And essentially this series is a series about a man putting on a one-man show inside a 1860s Methodist church in downtown Toronto. Now this character, his name is Gigi Jangles, and he's an amalgamation of traits shared by my father and myself. And the series is set in the year 1955, mid-century, and pays homage to different entertainers around the time and before, Bojangles being one of them, which is how the character got his name, Gigi Jangles, as well as other entertainers such as Cab Calloway. Now, in the image behind me, Retiree Soiree, it's photographed inside one of the garrets, inside one of the bell towers of the formerly known Bathurst Street Theatre, and it starts off the series in the first 3 images, and the character is grabbing different equipment that he would be using for his performances on stage. And the series is shot from the perspective of a photojournalist that is following Gigi as he's carrying out the pre-production as well as the production within the theater. In the photograph, there's a number of objects that are true to the space and its history, that being some of the signage that identifies the Bathurst Street Theatre. And it was paramount for me to include a lot of these real relics from the theater into the story, because my goal is always to tie in history as well as narrative and put it together to create a dynamic storytelling method. Now, in the next photo, which is Collected Histories, this is the only image in the series that does not include any figure, and specifically Gigi. There's one photo in the series that introduces a woman and another character, but primarily for the series, it is all self-portraiture from the perspective of that photojournalist. Now, this image includes more paraphernalia that is authentic to my father's experience, and I've scattered it across this table to pay the most respect to my father in respect to this series. And it includes a number of pamphlets, images from his time as a dancer within the Alvin Ailey dance troupe and other performances he would have carried out. This series is something that really, touched me to speak about, to be able to tie in family narratives with a semi-fictional narrative and bridging the gaps of realism, surrealism, and bringing them all together. It was really important for me to be able to tell a story in that way, because it came from a very honest and earnest place. But I believe with the types of stories that I like to tell, tableau as well as staged documentary narratives, I feel like helped me gain success in being able to tell stories from a certain perspective. In this photo as well, we have Cab Calloway on the TV, and I would throw in all these different indicators of the time period to try to do my best at showing the time period as well as references to the past that are paramount for especially Black entertainers throughout history. These are really important people that I would like to pay respect to and represent through my work. For the remainder of the series, it follows a linear fashion from start to finish. It's more or less a cinematic photo story that chronicles these events that my father went through, as well as myself. And so seeing the series from beginning to end helps create a good indication of what this character goes through. And essentially, it's a parable about creation and the struggles that one may have when they have a grandiose vision of whatever they're trying to attempt with a small support network. And I think it's important as artists to ask for help, but I think sometimes when we are fearful or have just a task that's monumental, it could be hard to ask for support. And so essentially this series shows what it's like to kind of go through monumental tasks and seeking out support, but also not asking for support, and seeing how that affects yourself, your own ambitions. And yeah, so that's the basic gist of this series, and I appreciate you guys for all being here. Thank you very much.
Well, that's great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Curtis. Our next artist, Chris Donovan, is a lens-based artist working in Toronto and New Brunswick. Hailing from the industrial city of St. John, his practice focuses on the intersection of community and industry. Please welcome Chris.
Thank you, Andrea. Thanks, and thank you everyone for being here, both in person and online. And I just want to take a moment to thank Andrea and everyone at the National Gallery and Scotiabank for their support of our work. So, like you touched on, my work revolves around the intersection of industry and community. I'm currently based in New Brunswick. I grew up in St. John at the mouth of the Willistic River. And essentially, so do we have pictures here? So here we go. So these are a couple of pictures from this project, the Cloud Factory, that's on view upstairs. So I'm going to focus on this work, and essentially, so the picture you see on the right is of Lisa and Trey, who are members of a family that I've been photographing for many years, I think for about 5 years now. I started this project about a decade ago and have been primarily following two families, and going back regularly and watching the kids grow up. And Lisa, her grandson, and her family is lucky enough to have moved, but when I took this picture, they lived next to the Irving Oil Refinery, which is the largest oil refinery in Canada. And they were facing severe adverse health effects, and Lisa's father died prematurely of a rare lung condition, and several of her animals had rare forms of cancer and skin conditions, and that was sort of the norm in this neighborhood. So in 2018, there was a butane leak, pipeline leak, and much of the neighborhood that she lives in was demolished, purchased by the Irving Oil Company. But she lived far enough from the pipelines that the company decided that they didn't feel as though they had to purchase these homes. So they felt stuck for many years, and then a year later there was a large explosion that rocked their house, and they were basically living in fear constantly. And so a lot of what I'm trying to address with this work is this idea of environmental classism, where people, in cities like this, like St. John is in some ways unique and in some ways very common, in that it's a town, an industrial town that relies on a harmful industry for survival. And these kind of places are all over North America and all over the world. I do a lot of work in Flint, Michigan. It's a very similar situation. Where greed is driving, the search for more and more money without really regard for how it's affecting people. And, in St. John, it's sort of unique because there's this extreme culture of censorship. So the Irving Oil Company, and the larger Irving group of companies who own logging industries, all kinds of things. They also own all the newspapers in the province. So part of the reason I wanted to do this project and share this work is to try to combat that culture of censorship that has been built up in the province of New Brunswick. A good example, just yesterday, the provincial government decided to ban land acknowledgements amongst its employees, and not a lot of people heard about it. Like, I expected that to be massive news, but I wasn't hearing people talk about it. And so there's this culture of censorship that has allowed industries to take hold and essentially take whatever they want and exploit people, that is going unchecked because there's not a lot of interest in this place, and there's not a lot of media interest, because the way that media works is that, local media is the ones on the ground, and then when stories are being told by local media, they take off in national papers and then international papers, and there's sort of a ladder that's climbed up, and it's cut off at its source. So for me, having a media background and an art background, I quickly realized that the art world is the place to get this work out, because everything was sort of working against me in the media sphere. So I appreciate very much the gallery giving this platform to tell this story. I think it's a very important one, and it's not about me and my art. I don't feel like it's about these people and what people are going through, and the culture, and how we can, hopefully try to make some change on the ground, which to me can only be done through, individuals looking and feeling like they can make some personal changes or at least start to talk about these things. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That's amazing. Thanks, Chris. Our next artist, Denise Nugent Polashi, is a founding member of the Plum and an ad hoc collective of artists, writers, and curators, an art venue in Toronto. She's also curated for Blind Spots, an art exhibition and film screening endeavor where queer artists explore LGBTQ experiences through a diasporic lens. Please welcome Denisha.
Thank you. Hi. Like the others, I'm quite excited to be here and to share my work with all of you, and for the support that I've received from the National Gallery, Andrea, and the Youth Generation Photography team. Yeah. So what I've realized is I have a hard time just putting my work into a sentence, so I'll just jump in and describe what you see behind me. So this work is called Red Earth of St. Elizabeth, How We Got Here. And it's a still life, which I feel like a lot of people are used to my photos that are portraiture. And I wanted to step away from that a little bit and explore objects and the things that I find interesting and, sorry, what's happening? Okay, sorry. Yeah, so I wanted to step away a bit from portraiture and just, yeah, explore my photographic practice in a different way, so using objects. And part of that was just, I was feeling strange about the ethics involved with documenting another person's their image, and sometimes the monetary value that becomes attached to that, and then making a living off of another person's image. So I wanted to do less of that. So even in still making these photographs with these objects, I realized that I am still speaking about identity in a very different way. The objects that you surround yourself with, they play into your identity and vice versa. So all the things in this image here speak to spirituality and the two realms that I arrive at my spirituality from. And a lot of the objects in this work are my mother's. So in the corner, I don't know, I feel like my head might be blocking it. So in the corner of the image down here, there's actually a photograph of my mother in her first apartment when she moved to Toronto in the 70s, well, late 70s, early 80s. And she's surrounded by all these tropical plants and those figurines that you see in this image. And I've just always found that image fascinating. And I feel like that's why I started to photograph plants before I included other objects in my photos. Just realizing that we both have this interest in coveting plants effectively and surrounding ourselves with tropical plants despite living in a cold Canadian climate where these plants would not survive on their own, but would grow quite wildly and freely in the Caribbean. And then I started to think about the migration pattern of those plants and how they arrived to me. So a lot of my plants I've acquired through convenience stores in Toronto. And like I said, they would grow just freely in the Caribbean, but they are actually from nurseries in a very clinical place, like they're housed in a really clinical, like greenhouse environment before arriving to me from Mexico or California. And then I also began to think about the Middle Passage, where I've been told that, I've never been to Ghana, I would like to, but I've been told that West Africa, Ghana, looks very much like Jamaica, and there's some speculation that that's because people brought seeds with them. in order to plant whenever they arrived, wherever they arrived. And I feel like that mirrors my almost necessity to surround myself with these tropical plants that my mother also has. But yeah, back to this image. So she would collect these plants and these figurines, and I have both an affinity and disdain for those figurines. So, for example, like the one on the right-hand side of the image, she had a bunch of these, as you could see, very colonial-looking figures, and as I was older, it didn't really make much sense to me why these existed in a black household and why I would go into other Caribbean households where the people were of a certain age and they'd own these. I feel like my feelings towards these objects, it shifted over time. And apparently I've had a disdain for those particular figurines for a really long time, to the point where when I was a toddler, I threw one down the stairs and called my mom to watch as it was tumbling down. But oh, sorry, what's happening here? Okay. So it's touching the rosary, which is on top of the coconut, and that is to speak to just where the spirituality that I've grown up around comes from. So obviously Christianity, Catholicism is we're indoctrinated into it. It's a colonial idea that didn't exist in my ancestors' lives until they were under colonialism. And then the coconut, it's significant in West African spiritual practices. Then we have the books that also speak to spirituality. And then the title itself comes from that red earth that's on in the corner again, underneath my mother's image. So she's from St. Elizabeth. A lot of our family on her side live in St. Elizabeth, and the earth is super red there, and I just have this vivid memory of anytime we went there, having to do this hike up to my great-grandmother's home, and you had to make sure that you brought shoes with you that you could just leave there because they were going to stain your shoes red. And I feel like that's how I approach my work a lot of the time, through these just visceral images that won't leave my mind, or things that have been said to me. So if we go to the next slide, I'll show you an example of that. So with this, it's called Can't Spell Talons Without Salon, and it's a nod to the labor that's involved with the upkeep of my aesthetic choices, basically. But there was someone in my life who would always call my nails talons, and anytime that was said to me, I just thought of a bird clawing into my arm, and I just couldn't get rid of that image in my head until I made this. So that's why this exists, and yeah.
Thank you so much. That's terrific. Thanks, Denisha. Next up is Dustin Bronze. The work of Dustin Bronze, our next artist, incorporates visual forms from Western art history to explore how they contribute to shaping social and political understandings of a range of contemporary events, from climate change to gentrification. Please welcome Dustin.
Thanks, Andrea, for that introduction, and also thanks to Jessica and also Carolina, who I don't know if is here, but she's been great to work with as well. So yeah, upstairs in the gallery, I have about half a dozen of these still life photographs, which I started making in about 2018. This work is dated 2019, but I think I actually probably took the photo a few months before that. So it's been about 3 years. And at the time, making this type of work was fairly new for me in terms of being more or less straight photography, sort of unaltered, not involving other media or appropriated imagery, but just kind of images made with a camera. And I guess I wanted to start looking at this one because it was one of the first ones that I made, and it kind of started from a different place where I was taking these photos in an apartment that I was living in for a relatively short amount of time. So I was like subletting, and all the stuff belonged to my roommate at the time. And so I was interested in taking these photos for various reasons, like just the way the light entered the apartment and the fact that I was in a new place. But I was at the time also producing these other images that were kind of re-photographed images from luxury condo billboard ads that I would pass on a daily basis. And I was interested in like pairing these images together to try and like make a connection between my own life and things that I wanted to be critical of going on around me. But in the process of doing that, I kind of abandoned that kind of additional thread and found that through, perhaps not so much in this image, but through these images that were just these kind of like straight still life photographs that I would take in my home, I could kind of at least address things that I wanted to without necessarily having these other more like overtly conceptual photographs as well. So at the time I was also interested in like using the genre of still life to kind of inform the way that I was like constructing and framing these images. Maybe we can move to the next image. Yeah, so this, I thought this is another one that's in the show, which is also, this image is called Gleaners. The previous image is called Stovetop, which is a fairly just like descriptive title. In this case, this is another apartment I was living in later on, and again, it is sort of like objects belonging to my roommate at the time. And I was interested in this image because he had this reproduction of the Millet painting, Gleaners, on the wall in the kitchen, which you can kind of see on the, I guess, left-hand side of the image over there. It's kind of out of focus, but I think if you know the painting, it's still fairly recognizable. So you know, in producing this image, I was interested again in like just like addressing what was in my life in terms of like the objects that I was being surrounded with, and also like trying to find these kind of like through lines to, I guess, histories of image making. Maybe there's a kind of like, there's a quick comparison between the idea of gleaning and the idea of collecting, you know, sort of like collecting things from the city in the way that he would do, and like bring a second microwave home to put on top of the microwave that we already had, things like that. And then there's kind of like a third thread in these images that I don't have an example of here, but for, like the two that I've shown are more or less unaltered by me. They're more or less observed. There's also some photographs in the show that are more constructed in terms of like objects that I've kind of arranged in a more or less obvious way. So like, I guess there's also an interest in constructing the images as well. But I think that does it for me. Thanks.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. Now we're going to have just kind of a general discussion amongst ourselves. We'll take questions from the audience at the end. But is there anything that you would like to ask one another at this point? Any questions or points of discussion?
Sure, I'll go.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Yeah, I have a question for Catherine. Now, being that you're just a storyteller and creating images that clearly have like an indication that you've thought about the structure of that image well beforehand, do you find that you see your images before you're constructing them on location? Like, are you imagining yourself or the different characters in the frame as like a drawing beforehand, say, or anything else?
In the sense of our women and girls are sacred, I did in fact have an idea in mind, but as soon as the smoke grenade goes off, it's uncontrollable. It has its own mind, and the image that I had shown earlier, as soon as the smoke did go off, that image is actually of me. I did have an instant moment where I wanted to push through the smoke, to push through, to continue on, and to be able to raise awareness about murder and missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit. And for the image of a Mautic, I definitely had an idea in mind where I wanted to be one with the land and connect myself in motherhood. And so a lot of those images are pre-planned. Images of my brother in the show, they were kind of candid images, so there's a bit of both of candid and planned in my world. Thank you.
Going forward, do you see yourself working more with constructed imagery, or do you still like to kind of integrate candid moments into the way that you are making your photographs?
A little bit of both. I always have my camera on me. For instance, we just came back from a Kaluit. I was able to bring my son for the first time since COVID. We were able to go on the land, be with my Anana, which it means my mom. So I have a lot of images in Nunavut where it's candid, but for instance, when the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation came, I had collaborated amongst other amazing artists. Kirsten and Pearlie was a creative director, but we had planned these strong images of Indigenous women in front of this abandoned and this overgrowth of a church, and we wanted to show the strength and resilience and indigeneity, and to say that the church did not, in fact, get rid of us all. So there's a little bit of both still there too.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Another question from somebody to someone else?
I do have another question.
Go for it.
Denisha, you mentioned, I guess, the struggle with photographing people and profiting. Was that what you were referring to earlier?
Exactly, yeah.
And when did you start feeling that way about I guess, profiting or even just gaining success based off of possibly someone else's involvement?
Yeah, I guess you don't really know where your practice is going to go, and like I feel like it's probably true for all of us. We just picked up a camera for fun at one point, and that always involved for me just taking photos of friends, or like I used to go to shows and parties a lot in high school, and I would take photos then, and then that evolved into being older and a more serious artist in school, and having a studio and wanting to also document other artists. And I think I just saw this thing happen where everyone wanted to collect or purchase this one image of a woman who, it's one of my favorite portraits, but it just felt strange that I was making some sort of monetary profit off of this woman's image. And when I took this photo, I wasn't necessarily in a position to pay them. I didn't think that anyone would be purchasing it even. It was, again, just something I did for fun. And I acknowledged this person's beauty, and I appreciated them as an artist themselves, so I wanted to photograph them. And it just, when the same thing kept happening and people just kept wanting to purchase images of other people, I feel like I want to hold off, or I've decided to hold off until I can compensate them after creating an image of them. Yeah.
So these images are images that you've either taken during a portrait session, or are they kind of like street photos in a
So
sense?
they're people I know,
Yeah.
like in portrait sessions.
Right.
But, and I think I've never felt comfortable taking photos of people I didn't know. So,
Yeah. It's always nicer when things are warranted. Even when you're taking street photographs and you've developed a relationship with someone that you have constantly encountered, and they eventually give you authority, it always tends to be much better in that scenario, just because that trust and respect is there, and that's something that you'll have like during your portrait session. So naturally, it's just going to occur pretty quickly.
and I think that's seen in like Chris's relationship with like the people that you photograph, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about this, like, idea around quote-unquote art success through the images of other people. Obviously, like, as a documentary photographer, most of my images are of other people. And it really, I think the context matters a lot. There's an interesting history, I think sort of precedent in both in documentary photography and documentary film, around who should be profiting and who has something to gain, whether it's monetary or otherwise. You know, a good example is the film Paris is Burning, you know, which is, you know, the filmmaker documented this drag culture and didn't, like, sort of like you said, didn't think it was going to be successful, and then it became extremely successful, and she was making tons of money, and then suddenly the ethics felt weird around it, where, you know, and then there was a court case, and the quote-unquote subjects, I don't even think that's a great word, but anyway, they ended up making, collaborators, I guess, ended up making some money off of that court case, and sort of set an interesting precedent. And it's really complicated in documentary because I feel ethically conflicted about, like, say with my work in St. John, like, I've naturally developed these friendships with these families as naturally as you can. I mean, one family, like, the first time I photographed them, I was working for a local newspaper for a story about intergenerational poverty and trying to break the cycle, and I just fell in love with this family and kept going back and built a genuine friendship. Like, but, you know, our first encounter, there was an inherent power dynamic that changed over time. And the other family, like, I had started to get this idea about what I wanted to say, and they lived by the refinery, and I just knocked on their door, and, you know, they were very suspicious. They thought I was with the Irvings, and, you know, and then we sort of carefully navigated, you know, our conversation, and then over time, you know, I kept going back and we became friends. But I think in terms of the ethics, like, there are some interesting things that people are doing now to address this. Like, one of my colleagues, Jeff Burke, who's a Toronto photographer, photographs homeless people in Toronto, and is
there's a great relationship with those people, though.
Yeah, totally. But the way that he does it is, you know, half of the money from print sales goes to him, and half of it goes to the people that he's photographed, and that's not traditionally what you expect in that kind of relationship. There's such a, like, history of documentary of photography of people who are underserved and unhoused that is often exploitative. But even then, the ethics are complicated to me because, like, as a documentary photographer, if I was to go into St. John and knock on the door and say, I'll pay you to take your picture, they suddenly feel as though they're actors in a way, and they're going to give me what they think I want to see. You know what I mean? And then it's less authentic. But it's always not fully authentic because people are going to act a certain way in front of the camera that they're not going to act when I'm not there. You know what I mean? So there's always a relationship at play. But I worry a little bit about, you know, in that context, paying somebody up front and then them feeling like it also makes the power dynamic weird. So part of me thinks that the only way to just, like, I was talking about this with someone recently, and we kind of, like, we're coming up with, like, what can we do? How can we address this just theoretically? And he was like, well, one way is that you don't tell people you're going to pay them, and then once you're finished, you pay them anyway. And I was like, yeah, maybe. And but what I try to do is like, you know, I know that people are giving me a lot of themselves, like a lot, and like there is genuine friendships, and what I try to do is like always bring pictures. Like every time I visit people, I bring prints, and I'm like, which is your favorite? And then I'll make a big one of that and bring that, and I go and people have them on their walls, and it becomes like a natural like give and take. And I hate to say that it's like transactional because, you know,
everything is.
Sorry?
Everything is, really.
Yeah, a little bit, but we both want the same thing, which is like, especially with Lisa, she was like, I want to get the word out about this thing, and me too. So like, how do we navigate that relationship where we both want the same thing, and it's always going to be kind of weirdly transactional, and like, how do you navigate that? It's a complicated question, and I don't know if I'll ever have like a perfect ethical answer to be like, yes, this is the right way. I think like, you know, everyone just has to try and do their best and like own up when you make mistakes, and then I don't know, how do you feel, like, because yours is very different, like not as a documentary photographer, but as someone who, there's a precedent of like hiring models, I guess, right?
And I don't know, maybe it's because there was a point in time, I still kind of do want to be a fashion photographer, so I used to approach my image making in that sort of way where you would have a model and like they would be there for that job. But I guess conceptually that's like not how I was viewing these portraits. Like they were always meant to be fine art portraits of a person that I know. So I don't know.
It's a complicated question.
It's complicated.
Oops, that might have been me. Is there any other questions that you would like to? How do you feel about working in black and white? That there's two here that work in that kind of medium, gelatin silver or whatever. We'll try you first, Curtis.
It was remarkable, you know, the difference of the film that I was using for this series, which was, I think it was Kodak T-Max 400, and the sensitivity of it under certain lighting conditions. I don't know if it's particular to a 4x5 negative or what, but you know, I would test out the lighting on my digital camera just to know that I had everything synced up, and the definition was like had so much more information in the shadows. So I felt like I was able to create images that had a certain tonality that I just wouldn't have otherwise been able to achieve, and it was specific to the time period that I felt like this press style made sense. And I usually try to tie in those type of situations to kind of indicate how I'm going to shoot, what I'm going to shoot with. So, you know, a lot of it was front flash lighting, Ouija style, press documentary style, and naturally it just was able to produce the results that I was very I desired to garner. And there's so much more that you can do compositionally, I guess, with black and white, because you're not dealing with the obstruction of color. You're dealing with highlight and shadows, and naturally compositions respond differently. Usually in your favor. Color has its own, I guess, favor, that being just the abundance of sensitivity to the color that you're seeing. But I appreciated the ability that I was able to get with the combination of the 4x5, the type of film stock I was using, and also the way that you're able to treat black and white. It's much different than color film. You can push it much farther than color film can be pushed within like a respectable sort of tastefulness. So, you know, you could take an 800 speed film or a 400 speed film and push it 3 or 4 stops. And it only adds to the allure in certain ways, especially in respect to like, I guess, documentary photography. I think a lot of photographers naturally were shooting in lower lighting conditions. So they're pushing their film much further. And yeah, so I guess there's more capabilities in certain aspects that would yield like really, remarkable results. And if you were to try to do the same thing with color, you would just get so much color distortion through the color balancing and graininess. You can get away, I guess, with a lot more with black and white. Yeah.
How about you, Chris?
Well, I think one of my favorite photographers, Vanessa Winship, a British photographer, talks about this. He gets this question a lot 'cause she shoots all in black and white. And she always has the same answer, and it's that, I'm not documenting the world as it is, I'm documenting the world as I see it. And I think that photography lends itself naturally to realism. And, in our contemporary time, black and white can be a way to push against that. I mean, black and white was realism right before we had color photography, but it's changed now. And I think there's some truth to that it can help in terms of the viewer sort of inherently understanding that this is your interpretation of the world, because it always is. And it is in color too, like we're choosing where to take the picture, even if, we're doing like some kind of straight documentary, and like Stephen Shore is a good example, who's like, I just want to photograph what's in front of me, but still is choosing everything to include in the composition. So even with color, there's, I don't know that there's such thing as like true realism in photography, but I think that audiences perceive it that way. And for me, similar to Curtis, I like to let the project choose the medium. Like my work in Flint, for example, I think it's better in color because I want to like accentuate this idea of like realism. Like this is and I don't feel as comfortable like trying to more subjectively like tell my Flint, because I am doing that, but I want to try to let the people that I'm photographing tell me their Flint, and try my best to, like, there's no such thing as objectivity, but try to be closer in that case, because I'm an outsider. But somewhere where I'm a little bit less of an outsider, like St. John, I feel more comfortable interpreting that way. And it's also, St. John is like a very, it's a city that hasn't changed much architecturally and in terms of just the landscape in general. So when you look at pictures from the 40s, 50s, 60s in St. John, like my pictures when they're in black and white look like they can be from that era. And I was kind of interested in like playing with that idea of nostalgia and kind of like bending like, or in the idea of timelessness, I guess. And I think it's cool when people look at it and they're like, I don't know when this was taken. And in some ways it works against what I'm trying to do, which is to tell people that there's urgency here. But that's why, there's other modes that I'm working in that same project that I think try to address that.
Yeah, no, I'm interested too in the choice of medium, but then the kind of genres that people are working in, like Dustin, you're working in still kind of in like a still life genre, and as is Denise, but in two very different ways. Like I've looking at your photographs, I think they're really kind of packed about how we live in the world today, and you're using that genre to construct a statement. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about other images? I know that people haven't seen them in this particular display here, but and then you too did, Denisha. Just this idea of being very kind of quiet in the still life genre.
Do you want to go first? Okay. Can you
sure,
repeat the question?
Like the subjects that you've chosen for your picture seem so ordinary, but they're packed to me about how we're living in the world. And maybe just a little commentary on that, if that's.
Yeah. That's along the lines of what I was thinking recently, like when reflecting on this work as well, is that I think I don't always like sometimes those things seem like a little bit by chance, but it's sort of like there's always objects or certain objects or iconography in the frame that is able to like orient the picture outwards, so that it's not necessarily just about like like the place where I live and the things that are in it. But I think that's like those, like that place and the things that are in it are always like, of course, like connected to like networks that extend outwards. And so like hopefully just by even the use of those like very domestic, like routine iconography, like there's still a connection to the world at large. And like, I don't know if that is sufficient.
Yeah. And you, Denise, you're using these, like the horse, figurines and these little orbs and they're, how do you come across those? Like, does it catch your attention?
They are just things I've grown up with around my house. And I don't know, I have just always found interesting for various reasons, but or just didn't understand their function or began to understand their function and realized that by putting them together with other objects, I can start to make sense of them. I don't know. I think I was drawn to still life photography just from still life paintings, like art historical still life paintings, where you can tell sort of what was happening in that time period by looking at like what's included in that frame. And I guess for me, I'm also using objects that are sometimes older than myself, but that's also to play into this circularity that I've noticed within my life, and just this mirroring of my ancestors' lives, my mother's life specifically. I've noticed that my mom comes into my work a lot. And I actually wanted to ask you about that, like, because your work is also about your father. Like, how did that happen? Like, why do you feel like you've chosen to include your father's narrative in your work?
Yeah, I mean, his whole journey has been like a massive part of my life. I grew up in that theater that I took the photos in ever since, I guess, the year 2000 and onwards. And, being involved in the performing arts at a young age, I maybe didn't realize the significance that it was playing in my life from an artistic point of view. So naturally, when I started to think of photography in like a fine art perspective, I noticed that I was bridging or including these tropes that I continued to experience for a number of years, that being, the lighting grid that's above us right now as a means to sort of indicate and motivate narratives in a particular way that was just so familiar to me. And so tying in the family, I think naturally, like any sort of coming of age story is going to include our families. And at the time, I think, just coming to terms with like the similarities that we find ourselves, within our families. I think all of us kind of have these pivotal moments where we're realizing the things that we're similar to them with, for good reasons or bad reasons, and addressing that, and to not be feared of those instances, I think is a really healthy thing. So in creating this series, I kind of faced a lot of these fears and also positive values, and addressed them in multiple ways. And it was really cathartic to include that sort of position or that stance I was able to take on a family member. And yeah, it was able to come from a very honest perspective, because it was like a very lived experience. And when you see yourself in someone, and I think especially when you value them so tremendously, it's you want to speak about it. And I saw the parallels in our life, and in creating this story, it was the first narrative that kind of had like a linear fashion that I was able to draw so much inspiration from my family. So it just felt like it made sense at the time. And at the time, I guess I would have been close to exiting university. And around that time, I think, storytelling, especially like sort of semi-autobiographical storytelling was playing a big role in all of my artwork, be it family or peers around us. Instances of strangers, peers, all that are probably like the most informative aspects of life that kind of inform my work specifically. Yeah.
And Catherine, you've described your work as a journey too. You're telling a story.
I definitely use photography as an outlet, as an extension of myself, as a way to tell my own story, and as a medium where I can fully express myself in ways where I can't with words. And I really do just feel like it's an extension of me, a lot of my work. And if a lot of my work revolves around political issues, it's because these are things that directly impact my life, and it's a way to, like you said, tell my story. And I just want to help to raise awareness on a lot of issues that Inuit face in Canada, and to be able to share that with everyone. It's truly life-changing, and I very much want to fully continue to tell more of the story and celebrate Inuit excellence, as much as I do speak about a lot of the socio-economical issues that we face.
Well, thank you all. I think now we'll go back to Jessica and see if there's any questions from the audience and any questions from Facebook.
Yes, so we'll start with questions from online. If you have questions and you are at home, please feel free to add them into the chat, and I will relay them to the artists. So we have one question right now. It is, and I think it was asked when Chris was talking, it's saying, where can he find his Kodak film?
I'm a downtown cameraman, so they're asking where they can find Kodak film.
I think so.
I'm big on those guys. So free shout out to Downtown Camera in Toronto.
All right. Look, for now, we don't have other questions from the Facebook Live. If other come up, I will bring them up. But if there's any questions from the audience who is in the room, you're welcome to come at either of the microphones in each of the aisles and ask them at this point.
Is that somebody coming?
I can see someone is coming to ask a question. We are in no rush.
Is Carolina? Is that Carolina?
Hi. I'm wondering how, and this is a question for all the artists, I'm wondering how COVID has impacted your practice. So the past 2 years, how has it been?
Yeah, it's definitely been a big change. I think initially when COVID happened, I caught myself. First and foremost, I was in pursuit of this trip driving across America, and so I think naturally the nature of street photography was kind of changing for me, because normally I would seek to photograph a lot of people wherever I was, but I noticed that once COVID happened, I was photographing these towns that would have been more or less pretty small to begin with, but every single photo I took was completely devoid of people. And it just became like a running theme in these photographs. And so I guess it was still street photography, but it felt more like landscape photography in a way. And I really liked it. I really appreciated it because I could just focus on a set that had no characters in it and just play with light, architecture, and create really, really good compositions that I think otherwise during a busy time period would be really hard to make. You have the obstructions of cars and I guess people at times that could kind of make it hard to just peacefully set up your frame with no obstructions. So I definitely took to it in certain ways and rode with it to just kind of, it's an indication of the time. And I didn't want to be unaware or just lose interest because of that. So I definitely kind of relished in a site that was pretty uncommon to see. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so funny because usually photographers in the past had to get up really early before anybody else got up, and like Atche or Dwayne Michaels, I can think of a whole bunch of them
Thomas
to
Struve.
find the kind of take the formal qualities of the city without people in it interfering with that kind of approach. So
No, this
yeah,
is midday.
yeah,
Just noon. Everybody should be at lunch.
yes, exactly.
You know, there's this one photograph I took of a Greyhound station in El Paso, Texas, and it was just framed up so perfectly, just, you know, where I was, and I'm just, you know, imagining like a different time period where there would have been multiple buses running, tons of people waiting at the bus stop, but the bus stop was devoid of anything, no garbage. Like, it looked so haunting, but also interesting at the same time. You know, so you didn't have to wake up at 6 or 5 a.m. to catch that morning light.
How about others?
I mean, my practice changed a lot through COVID. Pretty much every, my way of working is meeting strangers and hanging out in their houses, you know, for a large part. You know, when COVID started, I started doing a lot more personal stuff. And I just published a book that was essentially done all through. It started a little bit before COVID started, but it's called Stay Solid or Move West, and it's about the mythology of Maritimers moving west, and is made up of pictures of my life in Toronto and in the Maritimes. And COVID really highlighted for me how much my maritime identity mattered to me living in Toronto, because they shut down the borders, provincial borders, and I wasn't able to go back. So, there was that, but then also, even in the Cloud Factory project that's on view, I started thinking more about our lungs, and so I had a new approach that came out of, thinking about the ways that our lungs function, because they were sort of under attack by this virus, and in St. John we're already under attack by the particulate matter that's ever present. So I started photographing the particulate clouds, sort of mixing with natural clouds in color, as a separate part of this project that I don't know if I would have thought of doing it without COVID, because we were all talking about our lungs so much and thinking about, microscopic things that can really harm us.
I think for me it was issues around supply chain and collaboration that shifted a bit. So, for example, a strobe broke for me, and it just exploded it dropped and then exploded. But but that actually happened as a result of having to shoot during COVID. So I was doing a portrait for a musician in Toronto, Dorothea Paz, and it was at the early portion of COVID. So what we decided to do was shoot outside in, I think, February, but then also she has a little solarium. So what I did was I set up my lighting inside of the solarium and shot outside, but I rested my light on a ledge, which was maybe silly of me in retrospect, but it ended up tipping over and that strobe stopped working, and it took me months to acquire another strobe, just because it wasn't readily accessible. I couldn't just walk into a camera store and get it, so I had to order it directly from Bowen. So that's one thing. Or finishing work, working with technicians, that became kind of difficult, because you couldn't really be in such close quarters working and manipulating colors to get the exact print that you want. And I'm admittedly very picky, and it's a long process, and I'm thankful to all the technicians who have ever worked with me and are okay with my meticulousness. So that became more difficult. So driving to pick up a test but not being able to go into the studio to work with them to make those adjustments, and it just becoming this like drawn out process, and sometimes not being able to see my prints before they arrive at where they're supposed to be, and being surprised when they're on the wall. So yeah, that was like the biggest thing, I think.
I mean, I was already just making a few photographs each year at home, so in terms of the photographs, it hasn't changed too much for me, but, you know, other aspects of life, of course.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, but there's also all the fires that were happening in BC. I think that was pretty the environmental kinds of issues that were also contributing to difficulty, so to speak, and yeah.
There are some differences I noticed in like the grant applications in conjunction with COVID, because they ask you if COVID restrictions impede on your process, if you're traveling. Like that has a great effect on a lot of photographers, especially ones that are I guess outside of like a studio space. And I don't know if that'll like affect a lot of artists that are looking for grant funding and could face travel restrictions, but I noticed that was something that was mentioned during some grant applications. So I think there could be some changes to the way that I guess maybe grants are like handed out for certain works that could actually like prove to be problematic in certain regards, and setbacks like that. Like, I feel like there's a benefit for being a studio-based artist, especially right now, because maybe there's a little bit more allowance for continuing to produce work in a studio space, that being
For sure.
you, Denisha, but also
I'm in the
Dustin
studio
too.
Because I like control to begin with, but
Pardon?
no, I shoot in the studio because I like controlling my environment
Yeah.
anyway. But like my studio environment hasn't had to change due to COVID at all.
Yeah, no, exactly, and that's definitely a great benefit in these times.
What about you, Catherine?
I at the beginning of COVID, I didn't see anyone. My father, who has health issues, was living with us, so we were extra cautious. But I created this series on Sedna, the Inuit sea goddess, and I was in the snow. I definitely turned my art inwards, and then later on, the City of Ottawa Public Art Program created this piece called Microcosm, and they had a different artist in each ward of the city who created art that was shared publicly, because all the galleries were closed and you couldn't go in anywhere. So it was very creative to see what everyone had came up with. I ended up taping some of my images onto a glass so that people, when they walked by the building, were able to see the art from outside. So it definitely changed how everything.
Yes. So are we at time, Jessica?
So we have one last question that
Okay,
is
good.
very short. So the question actually for the film was for Curtis. So if Curtis, you want to say where you usually get your film, and then we'll be closing up for today.
Sorry, the question
Where
is,
do you get your
Same
film,
question.
where do I
Curtis?
get my film?
Yeah, what's your secret?
I thought maybe they had it confused. Pardon? Yeah, there's a shortage right now, big global shortage. You can still get film online from very random places, but it's difficult, especially for 4x5 film. There's
Yeah.
month back orders for next year. And so I continue to get film from independent film retailers, Downtown Camera in Toronto. Like Chris said, I've been going to them for years, and I'm proud, consumer of their products. No, they're great. No, they're just great people. Like they've helped like the Ryerson photo community for many years and offered incentives. So in Toronto there, but online, eBay. And if you can't get, film that's unexpired, then you gotta get expired film.
Thank you, Curtis, for that. So we'll be
Cheers.
closing up for the day. Thank you to Catherine, Curtis, Chris, Denisha, Dustin, and to Andrea. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. You can see more work by today's panelists in the New Generation Photography Award exhibition, which will be up at the National Gallery of Canada from now and until December 5th, 2021. To ensure a safe flow, we ask that you please exit through the door on your right. Wishing everyone a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.